Today's episode is brought to you by United Faith Leaders. Everyone should be able to find a faith leader when they need one. Find yours today at unitedfaithleaders.com. And by Free Range Priest, partnering to deliver clergypreneur training at clergypreneur.com. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Coffeepot Fellowship Podcast. My name is Jay McNeil, and our guest today is Melanie Mullen. Melanie is the Director of Reconciliation, Justice, and Creation Care at the Office of the Presiding Bishop of the Episcopal Church in what city? You're in the D.C. area, right, Melanie?
I'm in the D.C. area. Our headquarters is in New York, and I'm on the train a lot.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. I kept wanting to say, I wanted to confirm that it was in, I was thinking it was in Boston, but I'm getting my denominations mixed up.
815 2nd Avenue, an address all Episcopalians know as the place the presiding bishop lives and works. But mostly, we're all on the road all the time.
All on the road. Well, that makes sense, right? You got a lot of area to cover.
Yeah.
So he is the presiding bishop for the country?
For the entire denomination. And the Episcopal Church, is what people don't know, is the U.S., it's Haiti, it's Venezuela. So there are lots of places that are Episcopal Church, and we're all part of the Anglican Communion. So Bishop Curry is our leader. Yeah. That's
fantastic. So I'm excited about that. I've heard very good things about Bishop Curry because I just mentioned at the top of the podcast, Free Range Priest is run by somebody else who used to work with Bishop Curry in North Carolina. Her name is Father Kathy Caimano. I suspect your paths haven't crossed yet. You just worked for the same amazing guy.
Yeah, but the Episcopal world is a little small, and he is amazing. He sort of draws a lot of energy towards him because he's authentic and spirited. And if she's in North Carolina, then maybe we will cross paths.
Right.
I'm a Carolina girl.
Right. That's what I was noticing too, right? Went to University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill?
That's right. Yeah, for undergrad.
And then Virginia Theological Seminary.
Well, between there, I went to grad school in Black Women's Studies at Clark Atlanta, like you do, and I worked on the Hill, and then I went to seminary. So I've had a couple of reboots of my life, which has been great. Yeah.
Well, but I think you're using all of those skills still, right?
Oh, yeah. Totally.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. Cool. Well, I'll say that when I met Melanie, she was the priest associate and downtown missioner at St. Paul's Episcopal Church here in Richmond, Virginia. So I kept crossing paths with her at justice things after I graduated from seminary. But our very beginning goes way back to when I was in seminary. Well, I was in seminary for a long time, so it was the tail end of my seminary. But I was doing my internship at First Baptist Church with the senior pastor there. And one of my goals for the year was to learn how to do communion in the Catholic tradition. I just thought that they had that sort of prototype thing. I hate to compare it to McDonald's, but like anywhere you went, you got the same meal.
Liturgy, factory on the line, liturgy, yeah.
And I loved that I could get the same Eucharist communion experience at any Catholic church, pretty much. And then the Catholics were unable to, not just unwilling, by rule, they can't teach somebody else, right? A minister in another tradition can't be done, which is probably true of the Episcopal Church, but I asked your advice anyhow. So my pastor contacted your senior pastor, and then I got linked up with Melanie, who was very, very helpful. I remember being in her office and her lending me some books that I borrowed far longer than I was supposed to, which I do believe I did eventually return.
You totally did, but you can have them back now because they had pictures in them, and I needed them too.
Right,
so,
right.
As a new priest. Yeah.
So that's our way back story. Yeah. So I'm really grateful, and I tell that story because I think that it says a lot about who you are and how helpful you are and where people experience you in the world, at least when you were here in Richmond, right? Yeah. So thank you for indulging me in all of that storytelling. And I welcome you to the show. Formally, officially, loudly, glad to have you here. And I need to ask you right up top but rather how you like your coffee.
I like my coffee with cream and no sugar. So as long as it's a good hot brew, cream, but no sugar.
Cream but no sugar.
Yeah.
I'm sort of toying around with how I like my coffee now, and I don't even know how I like it unless I'm buying, a $5 or $6 coffee that's very sweet and decadent latte. Yeah.
A special occasion coffee.
Yeah, I have a lot of special occasions apparently. So
Good.
it's bad for my budget, but good for, I go and I camp out at coffee shops and I do work, which we'll probably do more broadcasts from actual coffee shops someday. But for now.
There you go. Third space ministry.
Exactly. Yeah. So I also wanted to ask you, while you were at Virginia Theological Seminary or thereafter, did you know or do you know Tricia Lyons, Kyle Oliver, Alex Moreski, Sarah Stonecipher, or Taylor Devine?
The Virginia Episcopal world is small, and Kyle and I are classmates. He's who we all want to be when we grow up. And Patricia Lyons and the folks who are wonderful faculty and sort of the adult shepherding our maturation as clergy are really important in our lives. And I love seeing them now as a graduate and a priest, and seeing how they're always full of ideas and coming up with new ways to sort of engage us. And Sarah Stonecipher and folks from the Diocese of Washington, that's my sort of nurturing diocese, my sending diocese. And so, I just love seeing folks in the classes below me, like Alex, and everyone sort of maturing and going through different cycles of what it means to do ministry. And so I know that there are people in your orbit, because they're the folks who are really out on the edge, thinking very differently about what it means to be church. And VTS supports it, but it's not going to actively give it to you. And so these are all folks who sort of go out and find different ways of doing ministry and then share it with each other. So I'm glad they're all a part of the network of folks who are really entrepreneurial. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been really exciting getting to know them and see the things that they're doing. Taylor Devine, some of you might remember her as Taylor Poindexter. When I interviewed her for the podcast, she was Taylor Poindexter, and she got married and changed her name and is rocking and rolling. I think she has not graduated yet, because that was 2015 and she was just starting. I think she met her would-be husband right as she was starting seminary, like I think visiting the school or something like that, or orientation or something. And they just...
VTS tends to do that.
Soulmates. Where have you been all my life? Yep. So if you get confused about looking for Taylor Poindexter, it's Taylor Devine, and she's fantastic. And I'm excited to see that she is continuing to rock and roll in the Episcopal world at VTS. So I did want to check in with you about those folks, because my world of Episcopal folks is growing and growing and growing, and it's been a lot of fun. All right, now into the body of our interview stuff. Can I ask you some story questions, Melanie?
Absolutely.
All right, our first one is always, can you tell us a favorite story, either one of your own or one that you've heard?
Unfortunately, I guess you hear a lot of really practice stories, because preachers sort of mind their personal one. But it's my favorite sermon allegory, and I've used it again and again. But it's just what I did for summer one year when I was about 15. A Carolina girl, I used to hang out with my grandma in eastern North Carolina, and she didn't drive. So we had to walk in the summer, and we had to walk to the mall in the 80s. It was really embarrassing, and just, walking on foot to the glittery mall in a small town where there was nothing else to do. And we did it again and again. Every summer I said, Grandma, so finally one day I was emerging as my social justice, self-righteous young teenager self. And I decided to put my foot down, because I was like, why are we walking to the mall? Because she was always going to the hat store, Wheels department store. To talk to an old white lady. Every week we do this, and I was sort of like, what are we doing talking to this old country white lady every week? And I was really self-righteous, had discovered all things civil rights movement. And finally she told me that this lady, her name was Mrs. Sasser, was her friend. And she had to visit her all the time because she'd been loyal to her back when Black women couldn't try on clothes in the store. Mrs. Sasser would hide hats and dresses and jewelry in the back, and my grandmother and her African-American teacher friends would go after work and try them on and buy them. And so this country store clerk lady gave her this incredible amount of respect, which one shamed me and taught me a lesson about making assumptions about people and using the word all for others. And a few years later when my grandmother died, Mrs. Sasser was right there at the funeral, the only white lady at the funeral, front and center with a hat on. So I love telling that story, and it reminds me, to keep myself humble in the midst of sort of being all about justice and figuring out what's wrong with this world. And that's my favorite story.
That is a really good story. You had me scared at the beginning because I was like, Melanie, do you hear what you're saying?
Yeah.
Of course you do. There's an evolution of character here, right?
Yeah.
As any good story. That's a good one. Thank you. All right. How about, and this is more challenging, a story of biggest trial or blunder? Do you have one of those you can share? She's nodding her head like, oh, do I have stories?
Do I have stories? And I'm glad I can share it now that I've kind of transitioned in the last 6 months to a different job. But I just remember in Richmond, little context, I was serving at a parish that was known for its history. So St. Paul's was very physically located in the center of the old Confederacy in downtown, and just physically covered in Confederate memorabilia and reminders of who it used to be. And this congregation started to wake up and have conversations, as you all know, in the last couple of years, thinking about oppression and slavery and history and what does it mean to have memorials. And we were doing good, hard work, but at the very beginning stages of that, me being clergy and working with my colleagues, trying to figure out how do we shepherd this community into those conversations. All of us young folks who are always online and on Twitter and on Facebook and are very self-revealing thought it's a great idea to bring in the media because we share. And I had a good friend at the Richmond Times-Dispatch, another young African-American woman who was the religion reporter, and invited her to be a part of one of our big public discussions about our Confederate legacy, and talked over with my boss and sort of made a strong case for how we could shape a story in a way that sort of makes sense to modern professionals. Did not realize we were dealing with people with different generations and different backgrounds, and the sight of a newspaper reporter just people went ballistic, and the room blew up, and very polite Southerners were yelling at this like stranger in their midst, and realized very quickly after a church-wide letter went out saying something must be done about this person who's on staff for now, Melanie, that I'd made a huge mistake, had put sort of all of us in a position where we were coming up against some, not just cultural differences, but the difference in generation. What is media for? What is visibility for? When is it acceptable? When is it not? So yeah, big mistake in the way, once again, you sort of make assumptions about people and how people are able to deal with change and what makes them really, really uncomfortable. So luckily, after a lot of a really loud and intense meeting and a lot of nasty letters and things, I didn't get fired, but it did. It was a hard lesson there about what people can and cannot tolerate in the midst of change.
Right. I would not have seen that coming either. I feel like it is so easy to trip up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're really trying to be sensitive and keep your eyes on so many different things and just what are the possible things that could go wrong? Didn't see that, right?
Right.
And even you mentioned like you had talked with your boss, so it's not like you snuck the person in, right?
Oh, yeah. But, anybody who works in the parish, you realize that stakeholders kind of shift. And if you're not clear who's really going to sort of pull the block out of your foundation, it can really take you for a loop. And so, that's a hard thing to get over when you're thinking about doing social change, because you're trying to build up trust and goodwill on an emotional level. And so little setbacks can really set you back. Yeah.
Well, and I don't know, obviously I'm still here in Richmond and you've moved away. I know they're still working on that process, right? That congregation.
Right.
But I'm not in it close enough to really have a good pulse on it. I hope they're continuing to do that good work. And I appreciated hearing that they were going through it because it needed to be gone through, right?
And very intentionally. And it's been 2 years, and there have been lots of newspaper articles and magazine articles, and there's a great Sojourners video about them now. So they've moved in a lot of ways to working with being open in that process, and I'm proud of them, and it was exciting, but there are methods to moving through change. And so I kind of was learning those as I went, and we all were. Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that story. I'm going to ask you to make a tough pivot here. And would you be willing to share a story of happiest ministry moment?
Yes, I totally would. And who would believe it's at the same congregation, but one of my jobs when I was doing downtown mission was to forage and go out on behalf of the congregation to the frontiers, as it were, in our city. And so we started an evening service with a different population. And the people that emerged were young, mostly gay, suburban, outside Richmond folks. So there were a lot of not typical St. Paul's, not typical Episcopalians, a lot of very young, with very humble roots or grew up in trailer parks eating cheese whiz, as they describe themselves, gay kids. And as I'm thinking, well, there are no rules for this kind of worship and ministry. What do you want to do? One day they said, we want to give something back to the church. We want to do a drag show. I have to say it's my fondest memory. It's a drag show for All Saints Day in which we had drag queens who wrote their own really spiritual depiction of the stories of the saints and performed it with singing and dancing. And I will deny if anyone says they've seen a picture of me in a sparkly leotard doing backup to Lady Marmalade with a drag Virgin Mary.
It never happened.
Not me. It didn't happen, but it was, I just remember tears in people's eyes, people in the congregation who saw that as a way of sort of representing the openness that they always wanted to have as community members, the joy of the performing cast and the way that they could sort of interact and be themselves. And it was just fun. And it was, so I have to say that the drag show for the Saints is right up there with something I'm always, it's going to be hard to top that.
I know. I wish what I want to tell our listeners is we'll link to the video, right? But
I
can't deliver. I can't deliver. There's no video.
There are some really fun little clips out there, but I deny I'm not in it. It's not me.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. That is a lot of fun. And I appreciate spaces where people do get to be themselves, right? And experiment and sort of explore with some of that in healthy ways.
Exactly.
Right? So it's good stuff. We don't talk enough about everything related to sexuality. And so good space. Thanks for being with them in that. All right. So how about now, as we begin to wrap up, is there anything that you would like to promote explicitly?
Sure. The joy I have in my new job, it's all the causes, justice, creation care, reconciliation, but the presiding bishop is really taken with asset-based community development, which is a way of doing community development that is rooted in community and humility and asking for the gifts of the neighbors around us. And so I get to shepherd a website and a learning series that originally was just the thought was only Episcopalians would do it, but we've sort of expanded to whosoever should come and be really interested in learning about asset-based community development. There is a website called calledtotransformation.org where you can learn about this really accessible manner of doing community development for any minister or layperson who wants to do church work in the community. And there's a list of the 4 times a year when we offer this training. It's really subsidized. You can come do a deep dive. There will be mostly Episcopalians, but anyone who really wants to learn how to be about doing community differently, doing charity that doesn't hurt the neighbors amongst each other, and thinking intersectionally about our causes. So come on and visit the web at calledtotransformation.org or let me know.
We will definitely put that link in the show notes. I'm very excited to hear you talking about ABCD, asset-based community development. Get my lips working. I would be remiss if I did not mention one of my colleagues, Wendy McCaig, who went to the Baptist seminary here in Richmond before me, and she's been doing asset-based community development here in Richmond for over a decade. It's probably 12 or 13 or 14 years or something, and she has a book out on it. And
Wendy's blog is a place I go to for my spiritual uplift, and following her on Twitter and Facebook, you get all the pieces of that on the ground learning, and it's great and a boon for me. So
good. I wanted to make sure that I mentioned her. I did not know if you would have met yet, so that I'm really glad to hear that you already know each other's work. Good. Yeah. We'll put that information. We've mentioned a lot of stuff, so I'm going to put all that in the show notes, as always, at coffeepotfellowship.com, www.coffeepotfellowship.com. Thank you, Melanie, for hanging out with us today. Your schedule is so packed, so I always appreciate getting to spend any time with you. So thanks for giving us, 30 minutes here to bend your ear and ask you some questions and find out what you're up to. It's inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you. Your work's inspiring. I'm glad to be a part of it.
Oh, definitely. Come back anytime. We'll check in again. Melanie, just thanks to you and to our listeners. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for living into who you are fully called to be.
Thank you.